It starts with a silent standoff. Two aging men trapped under the burning glare of Hollywood spotlights, pretending to hate each other for the cameras. But look closely at their eyes. The tension you see in the 1955 thriller A Bullet for Joey was not acting. It was the terrifying friction of two faded legends realizing they had reached the end of the line. By the mid-1950s, the golden age of the Hollywood gangster movie was dead. The smoke-filled rooms, the sharp double-breasted suits, and the cold-blooded anti-heroes that had defined a generation of cinema were being pushed aside by the rise of suburban television. In a desperate bid to capture the remaining magic of a dying genre, United Artists made a massive gamble. They brought together Edward G. Robinson and George Raft, the two definitive pillars of cinematic crime. On paper, it was a historic reunion. In reality, it was a chaotic collision of political exile, real-world mafia connections, and a bitter 14-year-old grudge that threatened to tear the production apart. Today, we are stepping into the shadows of a production that Hollywood tried to forget. We are going beyond the celluloid to explore the clashing egos, the systemic paranoia, and the hidden sacrifices that shaped this unique piece of film noir history. This is not just a breakdown of a classic movie. This is the untold story of the human cost behind the lens. We will reveal the secret political pressures that forced a cinematic giant into low-budget exploitation, the real-world underworld figures pulling the strings from the perimeter, and the structural illusions that built a metropolis out of nothing but thin air. Before we uncover the first secret, if you believe that the history behind the camera is often more fascinating than the movie itself, take a moment to subscribe. Let us pull back the curtain on a forgotten Hollywood battlefield. Number 1, the political exile of Little Caesar. To understand why Edward G. Robinson accepted a role in a mid-tier independent feature like A Bullet for Joey, one must understand the devastating atmosphere of the Hollywood blacklist. Robinson was a cultural icon, a brilliant intellectual, and a dedicated patron of the arts. However, during the height of the McCarthy-era Red Scare, his name was placed in the terrifying pages of Red Channels, a publication dedicated to unmasking alleged communist sympathizers. Suddenly, the phone stopped ringing. The major studios turned their backs on the man who had practically built the gangster genre. Many accounts suggest that Robinson took the role of Inspector Raoul Leduc out of absolute financial necessity and professional desperation. It was not a creative choice. It was a public attempt to show he was willing to work in highly patriotic, anti-communist films to clear his name. Every line he delivers in the film carries the heavy weight of a man fighting to salvage his dignity from the ruins of a broken career. Number 2, the 14-year dressing room grudge. The casting of George Raft alongside Robinson was hailed as a publicity masterstroke, but for the crew on the set, it was like walking through a minefield. The two actors shared a deeply volatile history, dating back to the production of the 1941 film Manpower. On that classic set, an intense rivalry over top billing and personal differences escalated into a legendary, real-life fistfight in a crowded dressing room. For 14 long years, the two icons refused to speak. When they were finally forced together on the set of A Bullet for Joey, the atmosphere was reportedly freezing. Director Lewis Allen had to carefully stage their interactions, knowing that a single misstep could reignite an old flame of physical animosity. The bitter, defensive energy you see between their characters was completely genuine. They were two proud titans who genuinely detested the sight of one another, trapped in the same frame. Number 3, the shadow of the real Underworld. While Edward G. Robinson spent his career merely portraying criminals, George Raft lived in their immediate circle. Raft's childhood friends included some of the most notorious mobsters in American history, including Bugsy Siegel and Oni Madden. Throughout his career, Raft famously refused iconic roles in films like The Maltese Falcon and Double Indemnity. choices that many film historians believe were influenced by his personal underworld code and lack of traditional acting discipline. By 1955, his real-life associations had made him a liability to the major studios. His performance in A Bullet for Joey, as a deported gangster hired by foreign spies, felt terrifyingly close to home. According to later accounts, real figures from the criminal underworld would occasionally visit the perimeter of the production, serving as a constant reminder that for Raft, the line between cinematic fiction and reality had completely vanished decades ago. Number 4, The Writer in the Shadows. The structural spine of the film was crafted by a brilliant screenwriter named Daniel Mainwaring, the creative genius who wrote the definitive film noir masterpiece, Out of the Past. Yet, if you look at the official credits of A Bullet for Joey, his involvement feels strangely compromised. Mainwaring, much like Robinson, was deeply affected by the political pressures of the era and frequently had to use pseudonyms or work under intense executive scrutiny to survive. He was forced to take a dark, cynical story about human greed and twist it into a heavy-handed piece of Cold War propaganda filled with atomic secrets and foreign agents. It is a profound, tragic irony. A writer who specialized in the beautiful complexity of human darkness was forced to write a black and white political sermon, leaving us with a script that feels like a silent cry for help from a compromised artist. Number 5, The Geography of Deception. While the cold, mist-heavy streets of Montreal serve as the atmospheric backdrop for this espionage game, the reality of the production was far less exotic. The film presents a seamless illusion of international intrigue, using establishing shots of iconic Canadian landmarks like the Victoria Bridge and McGill University. Yet, the vast majority of the principal photography occurred thousands of miles away, on the cramped, sun-baked sound stages of Los Angeles. Many accounts suggest that the budget of United Artists was so tightly constrained that they could only afford to send a second-unit camera crew to Canada to capture background plates. The actors themselves worked entirely in front of rear projection screens, pretending to feel the biting northern wind while sweating under powerful California studio lights. Why does this matter? It reveals the sheer efficiency of the mid-century studio system, which could manufacture an entire foreign metropolis out of cheap plywood, stock footage, and cinematic suggestion. It shows how the illusion of space was engineered to save every possible penny, leaving the audience to believe in a grand international conspiracy that was actually contained within a single block in Hollywood. Number 6, The Fall of the Noir Queen. The presence of Audrey Totter as the manipulative Joyce Geary added a layer of classic noir prestige to the project, but her casting also signaled a quiet tragedy. During the late 1940s, Totter was the undisputed queen of the hard-boiled thriller, reigning supreme at Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer with her sharp wit and dangerous screen presence. However, by 1955, the studio system that had nurtured her career was rapidly fragmenting, and roles for powerful, mature women were drying up. Her transition to lower-budget independent films like A Bullet for Joey was not a progressive career move, but a necessary survival strategy. On set, Totter reportedly brought a level of absolute professionalism that contrasted sharply with the chaotic, ego-driven behavior of her male co-stars. Her performance represents the desperate final stand of the classic femme fatale archetype, a dangerous and brilliant woman who was being systematically phased out of a changing cinematic landscape. Number 7, The Atomic Obsession. The plot of the film hinges on the attempted kidnapping of a brilliant physicist, Dr. Carl Ekstrom, played with quiet intensity by George Dolans. This specific narrative focus was not just a convenient plot device. It was a direct reflection of the terrifying nuclear anxiety that gripped the American public in the mid-50s. Only 2 years prior, the execution of Julius and Ethel Rosenberg for atomic espionage had dominated international headlines, leaving a deep scar of paranoia in the collective psyche. The script of A Bullet for Joey weaponized this fear, transforming a standard gangster story into a high-stakes battle for technological dominance. When Ekstrom speaks of his equations and the catastrophic potential of his research, he is speaking directly to the nightmares of a generation that was actively building bomb shelters in their suburban backyards. It shows how Hollywood took real-world existential terror and repackaged it as late-night entertainment, proving that the ultimate monster of the era was not a man with a gun, but a scientist with a chalkboard.
Number 8. The Echo of Lucky Luciano.
The character of Joe Victor, a deported American mobster languishing in exile, was not a product of pure fiction. His tragic situation directly mirrored the real-life fate of Charles Lucky Luciano, the notorious mafia kingpin who had been deported to Italy in 1946. Luciano spent his remaining years in exile, desperately trying to orchestrate his criminal empire from afar and constantly seeking a way to smuggle himself back into the United States. George Raft, who had spent decades socializing with real mob bosses, understood this profound desperation on a deeply personal level. Many accounts suggest that Raft drew directly from his conversations with exiled underworld figures to portray Joe Victor's burning, obsessive desire to return to his homeland. It was a rare moment where a Hollywood actor did not have to research a character because he had already lived in the shadow of the very men who inspired the story. This subtle authenticity elevated the film, turning a simple crime boss into a tragic figure of geographic and social isolation. We are halfway through our descent into the shadows of this production, and the secrets are only growing deeper. If you are fascinated by the hidden machinery of classic Hollywood, take a moment to leave a comment with your favorite film noir masterpiece. Do not forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel, as your support is what allows us to keep uncovering the human stories behind the screen. Now, let us return to the remaining mysteries of A Bullet for Joey and discover the ultimate fate of this forgotten espionage gamble. Number 9. The European Threat. Why did a film about American mobsters in Canada feature a villain with a chillingly authentic German accent? Eric Hartman, the cold, calculating foreign agent, was played by Peter Van Eyck. Van Eyck was a brilliant German actor who had fled the Nazi regime, worked in Hollywood, and returned to Europe before coming back to the United States. He brought a genuine post-war cynicism to the set. Reportedly, some of his intense, rigid mannerisms were not directed acting choices, but a result of his own deep anxiety about being typecast as a villain in post-war cinema. It showed how Hollywood imported real European trauma to construct its Cold War villains, relying on genuine displacement to feed its cinematic paranoia. Van Eyck's performance turned a generic communist spy into a haunting reminder of a fractured, war-torn world that Hollywood was eager to exploit, but unwilling to understand. Number 10. The Censorship Tightrope. The story was filled with murder, kidnapping, and treason, but the biggest threat to the production did not come from foreign spies or rival gangsters. It came from the strict control of the Motion Picture Production Code, known as the Breen Office. The censors were highly sensitive to the film's depiction of police incompetence and the brutal murder of a female character, Joyce. Many accounts suggest that the writers had to rewrite the police procedures multiple times to ensure the Royal Canadian Mounted Police looked completely flawless and heroic. Furthermore, the intense focus on the atomic equations of the scientists was heavily monitored. The government was terrified that any realistic scientific jargon might accidentally reveal actual nuclear secrets, forcing the writers to use completely nonsensical, fabricated terms. It highlights the absurd level of systemic control during the Cold War, where even fictional entertainment was treated as a potential national security risk. It left the production team working under a cloud of bureaucratic fear, turning what could have been a raw, gritty masterpiece into a sanitized, politically compliant sermon. Number 11. The Climax in the Fog. The dramatic climax of the film, on a fog-drenched yacht, was supposed to be a sweeping, atmospheric sequence, but the reality was a logistical nightmare on a bone-dry soundstage. To simulate the thick, cold, maritime fog of the St. Lawrence River, the crew used chemical smoke generators that filled the soundstage with toxic, foul-smelling fumes. The actors, especially the aging Edward G. Robinson, suffered from intense coughing fits, forcing the director to shoot the climax in incredibly short, fragmented bursts. Reportedly, the physical exhaustion seen on George Raft's face during his character's dying moments was entirely real, caused by the suffocating atmosphere of the set. It shows the physical toll that low-budget filmmaking extracted from its aging stars, who were willing to endure hazardous conditions just to keep their names on the marquee. What appeared to the audience as a beautifully stylized, tragic ending was actually a grueling struggle for breath, a literal trial by fire for two legends of the silver screen. Number 12, the prophetic mirror of decline. For George Raft, his role as Joe Victor was not just another job. It was a tragic, prophetic mirror of his own decline. Raft's career had been in a downward spiral for a decade, and this film was one of his last major leading roles in a theatrical crime film. His character dies after realizing he has betrayed his own country, choosing a bullet over dishonor. This redemptive arc was highly unusual for Raft, who historically hated playing characters who died or showed weakness on screen. Many accounts suggest that Raft only agreed to the death scene because he believed it would evoke a powerful, sympathetic reaction from the audience, helping to revive his failing star power. It reveals the deep vulnerability of an actor who had spent his entire life projecting an armor of cool indifference, now reduced to begging for the audience's pity. The film became a quiet, melancholy farewell to Raft's era of the gangster, marking the moment when the tough guy finally laid down his weapons and surrendered to the passage of time. Number 13, the death of the mid-budget feature. In 1955, the middle class of Hollywood was quietly executed. During this pivotal era, United Artists was pioneering a new model of independent distribution, attempting to give creative freedom back to filmmakers. However, this noble experiment meant that films like A Bullet for Joey had to survive on a shoestring budget of under $300,000, forcing extreme cutting of corners while expecting to compete with sprawling million-dollar Technicolor epics. The lack of promotional resources meant the film was quickly dumped into secondary theaters, treated by the studio as disposable content rather than a star-studded cinematic event. Many accounts suggest that the raw, almost clumsy dialogue in the film, with characters abruptly muttering about a red job or offering a tense welcome to Canada and to freedom, was the direct result of a rushed production that could not afford script polish or retakes. Why does this matter? It marked the end of the mid-budget studio film, establishing a trend that persists today, where films are either massive global blockbusters or micro-budget indies. It is a quiet, frustrating testament to a proud business model that vanished, leaving its veteran actors to wonder if their artistic value had expired along with it. Number 14, the silent screen migration. As movie theaters began to empty across North America, a new glowing box inside American living rooms was stealing the audience. The explosive rise of television in the mid-50s was an existential threat to cinema, and both Edward G. Robinson and George Raft knew they had to adapt to survive. During the filming of this project, both lead actors were actively being courted by major television networks for syndicated anthology series and guest appearances. According to later accounts, the stars were frequently distracted on set, spending their production breaks reviewing television offers in their trailers rather than focusing on the film's complex espionage plot. This behind-the-scenes reality is why the movie itself often looks and feels like early television. It was shot with the speed, simple blocking, and limited scale of a 1950s TV drama, bypassing the grand visual scope of classic cinema. It represents the exact moment when the silver screen lost its monopoly on our dreams, forcing the giants of the golden age to shrink their performances to fit inside a mahogany living room cabinet.
Number 15.
The ultimate sunset of the giants. When the final frame of the film fades to black, the true tragedy on display is not the violent death of the gangster Joe Victor. The resolution of the movie features a quiet, heavy-hearted redemption where George Raft's character chooses a bullet to protect his country, watched over by a solemn Edward G. Robinson. This was the absolute final time these two legends of the gangster genre would ever share a screen together, ending a cinematic rivalry that had spanned nearly 2 decades. The quiet handshake and mutual nod of respect they share in their final scene was reportedly not written in the shooting script. It was a spontaneous, unprompted moment of professional closure between two aging men who silently understood that their era of cinematic dominance had reached its absolute end. Why does this matter? The scene completely transcends the generic narrative of atomic secrets and communist spies. It becomes a deeply moving meta-documentary of two lions of early cinema acknowledging their shared history, their personal truths, and their inevitable obsolescence. It is a heartbreakingly beautiful farewell, a final truce signed in the cold shadows of a low-budget thriller, ensuring that their last shared moment on Earth was one of quiet, dignified peace. When we look back at A Bullet for Joey, we do not see a perfect movie. We see a fascinating, imperfect mirror of a changing world. It is a film that carries the physical bruises of the McCarthy-era blacklist, the economic anxiety of independent filmmaking, and the quiet desperation of fading stars facing the dawn of a new media age. Yet, it is precisely these flaws and historical pressures that make the film endure as an essential artifact of cinema history. It carries the distinct fingerprints of real people working under extreme pressure, trying to capture lightning in a bottle one last time before the storm passed them by. It reminds us that behind every frame of film, there is a human struggle that is often far more compelling than the fiction projected on the screen. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the lost history of classic Hollywood, take a moment to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. What is your favorite forgotten gem of the 1950s? Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time as we continue to unlock the secrets behind the films that shaped our history.